There is a version of you that exists somewhere down a different road. Not a better version, not a worse one, just a version who at some point made one different choice. He stopped answering the phone when a certain name appeared on the screen. She stopped scrolling through a feed that made her feel smaller every single time she opened it. He walked out of a room instead of staying to be diminished in it one more time. That version of you is not living a different life because they got lucky. They are living a different life because they understood something most people never learn. You do not rise by adding more to your life. You rise by removing what was never supposed to be there. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world, sat alone in his tent on the frozen edges of the Roman Empire and wrote a single sentence to himself that has outlived every emperor who came after him. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He was not talking about controlling the barbarians at the border. He was talking about something far harder to conquer. He was talking about what we let inside our own heads. Today we are going to talk about the negative influences quietly running your life without your permission. The people, the habits, the screens, the voices, including the one inside your own skull. And by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly how the Stoics, the same men who ruled empires, survived exile, and faced death without flinching, dealt with the exact same poison you are dealing with right now. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the home for anyone who is done living by accident and ready to start living on purpose. Ancient wisdom for the modern mind. If you are new here, we take 2,000 years of hard-won philosophy from men like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and we translate it into something you can actually use tomorrow morning. Not theory, not academic noise, tools. If that sounds like something you need in your life right now, this is exactly where you are supposed to be. Let's start with a question, and I want you to actually sit with it instead of rushing past it the way we rush past everything now. Who or what drained you yesterday? Not who annoyed you, drained you, left you smaller than you were when the day started. Take a second. A name is probably surfacing right now. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's an app. Maybe it's a memory you keep replaying like a song stuck on repeat. A memory that never changes the ending no matter how many times you play it back. Hold that thought, because we are going to come back to it. And by the time we do, you are going to have a plan for it that you did not have 5 minutes ago. Let me introduce you to 3 people. Their situations are different, but if you pay attention, you are going to see pieces of yourself in every single one of them. Elena is 34 years old, and for the last 6 years, she has had a friend named Priya. On paper, Priya is a good friend. She shows up to birthdays. She remembers anniversaries. She sends good morning texts. But here is the thing about Elena that took her years to even notice about herself. Every single time she hangs up the phone with Priya, she feels like she has just lost a boxing match she did not know she was in. Priya has a gift, the kind of gift that never announces itself as a weapon. She can take any piece of good news and, within 30 seconds, turn it into something smaller. Elena got a promotion and Priya's response was, "That's great, I guess now you'll never have time for anything else." Elena started dating. Someone new, someone kind, someone who made her laugh in a way she had almost forgotten she could laugh. And Priya's response was, "He seems nice. I just hope he's not like the last one." Every compliment arrives with a small blade folded inside it. And Elena, being a decent, loyal person, kept explaining it away. "She's just honest. She's just looking out for me. She doesn't mean it like that." James is 41. He runs his own small business, a business he built from nothing, working 16-hour days for the first 3 years just to keep the lights on. And James has a habit that he would never call an addiction, because the word addiction feels too dramatic for something that happens on a phone screen. But here is what James does every single night. He lies in bed exhausted, and instead of sleeping, he opens an app and watches other men his age standing in front of yachts. Private jets, mansions with infinity pools that seem to spill directly into the ocean. He tells himself he's just staying informed, just keeping up with trends for his business. But he knows, somewhere underneath the surface, that every night he does this, he wakes up the next morning feeling like his own life. The business he is genuinely proud of, the family who loves him, is somehow not enough. Not because anything changed about his actual life, because he spent an hour comparing his behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel, and his brain cannot tell the difference between comparison and truth. And then there's Marco. Marco is 28, and Marco's negative influence does not have a face at all. It lives inside his own head. Marco calls it being realistic, but what it actually is a voice that narrates his entire life in the worst possible light. He gets an interview, and before he even walks into the room, the voice has already told him he's not going to get it, so why bother preparing too much? He starts a new hobby, and by week 2 the voice is whispering that he's too old to start something new, that everyone else is already better, that he should just quit before he embarrasses himself. Marco has never once stopped to ask where this voice came from, whether it is even telling him the truth, or whether he has simply mistaken a familiar voice for a wise one. Elena, James, and Marco do not know each other. They live in different cities, work different jobs, have completely different lives, but they are fighting the exact same war, and it is a war that Epictetus, a man born into slavery nearly 2,000 years ago, understood with a clarity that most people today still have not reached. Epictetus once said something that should be printed on the inside of every person's eyelids. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." Read that again. It is not the thing that hurts you. It is the meaning you assign to the thing. And this is exactly where negative influences do their damage, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow, repeated act of teaching your mind to assign the wrong meaning to your own life. Priya does not have to physically hurt Elena. She just has to keep teaching Elena's brain that her wins are suspicious and her happiness is temporary. James's phone does not have to lie to him outright. It just has to keep showing him a curated slideshow until his brain quietly concludes that everyone else's life is real and his is somehow lesser. And Marco's inner voice does not need evidence. It just needs repetition. Say something enough times in your own voice, in the privacy of your own skull, and it stops sounding like an opinion. It starts sounding like a fact. This is the first thing you need to understand if you actually want your life to change. And I mean actually change, not the temporary high of a motivational video that wears off by Thursday. Negative influences are rarely loud. They are rarely obvious villains twirling a mustache, warning you before they strike. They are quiet. They are patient. They wear the costume of a friend, a habit, a hobby, even your own internal monologue. And because they are quiet, most people never even identify them as the enemy. They just feel tired all the time and assume that's what adulthood is supposed to feel like. It is not. If part of this video is already hitting somewhere real for you, do me one favor before we go further. Drop a single word in the comments. Just one. The name of the influence you already know is draining you, whether that's a person, a platform, or a pattern. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to justify it. Just name it. There is a strange kind of power in writing something down in front of witnesses. It turns a vague feeling into a fact you can no longer pretend not to see. Now, here is where most self-help content stops. It tells you to identify the toxic people, cut them out, delete the apps, think positive, and it leaves you standing there with a to-do list and no actual understanding of how to execute any of it without guilt, without fear, without the nagging sense that you're somehow being cruel or dramatic. The Stoics did not stop there. They gave us an actual framework, and it starts with one of the most misunderstood ideas in the history of philosophy, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus taught this above almost everything else. He said there are two categories of things in this life: things that are up to us and things that are not up to us. Our judgments, our desires, our reactions, our choices, these are up to us. Other people's opinions Other people's behavior, the past, most of the outside world, these are not up to us. And almost every form of suffering that human beings experience comes from confusing the two categories. We try to control what is not ours to control, like other people's opinions of us, and we neglect what is entirely ours to control, like our own reactions and choices. Elena spent 6 years trying to control something that was never hers to control. Priya's need to diminish other people. She kept hoping that if she just explained herself a little better, if she just proved her happiness was legitimate, Priya would finally stop. But Priya's behavior was never Elena's to fix. What was Elena's entirely, completely, 100% hers was the choice of how much access to give Priya, and how much weight to give Priya's words. That is the line the Stoics drew, and it is the line you need to draw too. This is not about becoming cold or cutting people off with no thought or mercy. Stoicism is not about turning your heart into stone. It is about precision. It is about finally understanding that you get to decide who has a vote in your life, and more importantly, how loud that vote is allowed to be. Let's talk about Seneca for a moment, because Seneca understood something specific about influence that I think most people today desperately need to hear. Seneca wrote extensively about the people we surround ourselves with, and he did not mince words. He said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." Simple sentence, almost embarrassingly simple, but sit with the weight of it. Every person you spend regular time with is either sanding you down or building you up. There is very rarely a neutral middle ground, not over the long run. Seneca compared it to standing near a fire. Stand close enough to warmth and good energy, and you absorb some of that warmth even without trying. Stand close to something cold and corrosive long enough, and eventually you start to feel that cold too, even if you never notice the exact moment it crept in. Seneca lived this out under extraordinary pressure. He was exiled to the island of Corsica for 8 years on questionable political charges, cut off from Rome, from his career, from the life he had built. And later, he served as advisor to the Emperor Nero, one of the most volatile, dangerous men to ever hold power, a man who would eventually order Seneca's own death. Seneca understood, in a way most modern people will never be forced to understand, that you do not always get to choose everyone around you. But he also understood, with total clarity, that you always retain the choice of how much of yourself you hand over to the people and situations you cannot fully escape. So let's go back to James for a moment, because James's negative influence is not a person he can simply block. James's negative influence lives in his pocket, follows him into bed, and whispers to him in the dark. And I want to be honest with you about something, because this channel does not exist to make you feel worse about the life you already have. It exists to hand you tools. James did not need to swear off technology forever, throw his phone into a river, and move into a cabin in the woods. What James needed was something the Stoics practiced constantly, the discipline of assent. Epictetus taught that between an impression, meaning a thought, an image, a comparison that flashes into your mind, and your reaction to it, there is a gap, a small space, and in that space lives your entire freedom. The image of the yacht enters James's mind uninvited. That part he cannot control. But what he does next, whether he lingers there, scrolls for another 45 minutes feeding the feeling, or whether he catches the impression and says to himself, "This is a highlight reel, not a life," that is entirely his to decide. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself alone at night, practiced this exact discipline daily. In his private journal, the collection we now call Meditations, which he never intended for anyone else to read, he wrote, "Today I escaped anxiety." Or no, I discarded it, because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside. Read that sentence again slowly. Discarded it, not suppressed it, not pretended it away. Discarded it, the way you would set down a heavy bag you finally realized you never needed to carry. This is the part where most people watching this video are going to want a shortcut. And I understand that. So let's build one together right now, using exactly what the Stoics left behind. Step 1. Name it precisely. Not vaguely, precisely. Not, I feel bad after talking to certain people. Name the person. Not, I feel weird after being online. Name the app. Name the account. Name the specific behavior. Vague enemies are impossible to fight. Specific enemies can be dealt with. Step 2. Sort it using the dichotomy of control. Ask yourself honestly, is this thing something I can act on directly? Or is it something I have been quietly hoping will change on its own if I just wait? Explain myself better or try harder to be understood. If it falls into the second category, and for most negative influences it absolutely does, then your energy needs to move somewhere else entirely. Step 3. And this is the step almost nobody talks about because it requires actual courage. Instead of just posting a quote about courage, decide your relationship to the influence, not the influence's behavior. You cannot force Priya to stop being subtly cruel. You can absolutely decide how much of your inner life you continue handing her. That might mean less frequency. It might mean keeping conversations lighter, more surface level, protecting the parts of your life that matter most from her commentary. It might eventually mean stepping away entirely. That decision belongs to you, and only you. And I am not here to tell you which choice is right, because the Stoics were never in the business of handing out identical instructions for every unique life. They were in the business of handing you a compass, then trusting you to walk your own road with it. Step 4. Replace, don't just remove. This is the step people skip constantly, and it is why so many attempts to cut out negative influences fail within a couple of weeks. If you remove a habit, a person, a pattern, and leave a blank space where it used to be, your mind, which despises emptiness, will often go looking for something to fill that space, and it is not guaranteed to choose something better. James did not just need to delete an app. He needed something to put in that late-night gap instead, something that actually served the life he was trying to build. He chose something almost embarrassingly simple. He started reading 10 pages of an actual book before bed. Not a productivity hack, not a morning routine overhaul. 10 pages, and within a few weeks something shifted that he did not expect. He wasn't just sleeping better. He noticed the comparison spiral had lost most of its grip on him, because he had simply stopped feeding it every single night. Now let's talk about Marco, because Marco's battle is the hardest one of the three. And if you are being honest with yourself, it might be the one closest to your own life. It is one thing to remove a toxic friend. It is another thing entirely to remove a toxic voice that lives inside your own head, speaking in your own voice, using your own memories as ammunition. Marcus Aurelius fought this exact battle, and here is something that might surprise you. The most powerful man in the world, commander of legions, ruler of an empire that stretched across 3 continents, still had to write himself reminders not to spiral into self-criticism and doubt. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That sentence is not just inspirational wall art. It is a redirect. It is Marcus catching his own mind mid-spiral and physically, deliberately steering it somewhere more useful. Marco's inner voice told him he was too old to start something new. Here is what nobody ever told Marco, and what I need you to hear clearly if any part of you has a voice, like is living in your head right now. That voice is not wisdom. Wisdom does not need to insult you into staying small. Wisdom does not require you to shrink in order to feel safe. What Marco was calling being realistic was actually just an old fear wearing a very convincing disguise. A fear so familiar that it had started to sound like his own good sense. Epictetus taught his students a specific mental exercise for moments exactly like this, and I want to walk you through it, because you are going to be able to use this the very next time that voice shows up uninvited, when a harsh, critical thought arrives, whether it's about a mistake you made, a fear about the future, or a comparison to someone else. Pause and ask one simple question. Is this thought giving me information? Or is it just giving me pain? Real, useful self-reflection gives you something to act on. It says, here is what you can adjust next time. Destructive self-talk gives you nothing but weight. It just says you are not enough and leaves you there to drown in it with no ladder out. Marco started practicing this. Every time the voice said, "You're too old for this," he asked, "What information is this actually giving me?" And the honest answer, every single time, was none. It wasn't teaching him anything he could use. It was just repeating an old fear on a loop. Once he saw it clearly for what it was, weightless noise dressed up as wisdom. It started losing its grip on him slowly. The way anything loosens once you finally stop feeding it your full attention. I want to pause here and ask you something, because this is the part of the video where I actually need you to participate, not just absorb. Somewhere in the last few minutes, a specific memory or a specific voice probably surfaced in your mind, uninvited, the way these things do. I want you to type it in the comments, even just a fragment of it. Not for me. Not for the algorithm, although yes, it does genuinely help this video reach someone else who needs to hear this today. And if you haven't yet, this is a good moment to hit subscribe so more of this actually reaches you when you need it most. But mostly, I want you to type it because articulating a thing out loud, or in writing, robs it of some of its power. Silent thoughts left unexamined tend to calcify. Thoughts spoken into the light tend to shrink. Let's talk about something that ties Elena, James and Marco together, something the Stoics understood, that we have almost entirely forgotten in a world engineered to keep us distracted, comparing and consuming. Every single negative influence, whether it wears the face of a person, a platform, or your own inner critic, survives on one resource and one resource only: your attention. Not your time, your attention. You can spend 8 hours a day around someone and barely give them any real attention. You can spend 3 minutes scrolling and hand over your entire nervous system to a stranger's curated highlight reel. Attention, not time, is the actual currency of your life. And the Stoics understood this centuries before anyone had a word for content. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that reads almost like a warning aimed directly at every person alive. In this century, despite being written for himself alone, on a battlefield with no audience, no idea that his private journal would ever be read by another human being, he wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." He was not writing self-help content for views. He was reminding himself, in the middle of war, disease, and the exhausting weight of governing an empire, that his internal world was the one territory nobody could invade unless he personally handed over the keys. So here is the uncomfortable truth this video has been building toward. You are not powerless against negative influences. You have simply, unknowingly been handing over the keys. To Priya's comments, to the highlight reel James scrolls through at midnight, to the voice in Marco's head that he mistook for honesty instead of recognizing it as fear. And the moment, the actual, specific moment you take those keys back, is the moment your entire life quietly begins to reorganize itself around what actually deserves your energy. Let's return to the three of them one more time, because I want you to see what this actually looks like when it's lived out, not just theorized about. Elena did not cut Priya off in one dramatic conversation, and honestly, most real change in life rarely happens in one dramatic conversation. No matter how satisfying that would be to film, she simply quietly started giving Priya less. Fewer details about her wins, shorter conversations. She stopped explaining herself when Priya's comments landed wrong, because she finally understood she was never going to explain her way into a different response from someone who had a pattern years in the making. 6 months later, Elena described the shift in a way that stuck with me. She said it wasn't that Priya changed at all. It was that Priya's words simply stopped reaching as deep as they used to, because Elena had quietly moved the door. James still has the app on his phone. He never deleted it, and honestly he didn't need to, because the goal was never the app itself. It was his relationship to it. But his nights look different now. 10 pages of a book most nights. Some nights he still scrolls, and he doesn't punish himself for it anymore, because he understands now that this is not about perfect execution. It's about consistently returning to the choice, the way you return to center after losing your balance, not falling apart the moment you wobble. Marco still hears the voice sometimes. It has not vanished completely, and if anyone tells you their inner critic disappeared forever after one video or one journaling session, they are selling you something. But Marco has a question now, a tool he did not have before. A single sentence that catches the voice before it can fully take root. Is this giving me information or just pain? That single filter has changed the trajectory of his entire year, not because it eliminated fear, but because it stopped fear from getting to drive. This is what Stoicism actually offers, and it's worth being honest with you about what it does not offer. Because I would rather you trust this channel with the truth than chase you with a fantasy. It does not offer a life with zero negativity. It does not offer a world where nobody ever hurts you, disappoints you, or triggers old wounds. What it offers is something quieter, and honestly something far more durable. It offers you the return of your own hands on the wheel of your own mind. It offers the understanding that you were never actually required to carry every voice, every comparison, every inherited fear as though it were gospel truth. Epictetus, a man who began his life enslaved, who had his leg broken, who owned almost nothing in the material sense for most of his life, still managed to write words that free people today. People with far more comfort and far more choice than he ever had still struggle to live by. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Read that again, and notice what it does not say. It does not say no man is free who has a hard life. It does not say no man is free who has toxic people around him, or a difficult past, or an inner critic. It says master of himself. The mastery was always the actual target, not the elimination of every hard thing life throws at you. Because that was never on the table for anyone, not even for an emperor who ruled the known world. If you have made it this far into the video, I want you to do one more thing before we close this out, and I promise this is the last ask. Think about the name, the app, or the voice you thought of at the very beginning, the one I asked you to hold on to. I want you to pick just one small, specific action, not a massive life overhaul, just one small move that you can take in the next 24 hours. Maybe it's a shorter phone call. Maybe it's deleting one app from your home screen, even if you don't delete the account entirely. Maybe it's simply catching yourself the next time that inner voice speaks, and asking it out loud if you have to. What information are you actually giving me right now? Small moves, repeated consistently, are the entire foundation of everything Eleanor, James, and Marco eventually built. Nobody in this video had a single dramatic turning point. They had 100 small, boring, unremarkable choices made quietly that eventually added up to a completely different life. Seneca, in one of his letters, wrote something that I think about often, something that feels like it was written directly for anyone sitting exactly where you are right now, at the edge of a decision they haven't fully made yet. He wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that most of what drains us is not the actual weight of our circumstances, but the endless mental rehearsal of every possible way things could go wrong, every comparison we didn't need to make, every voice we never questioned the authority of. 2,000 years later, standing in a completely different world, surrounded by technology Seneca could never have imagined, that sentence has not aged even a single day. Because human nature, underneath all our new inventions, has not actually changed nearly as much as we like to pretend it has. So here is where I want to leave you. Somewhere in your life right now, quietly, patiently, without ever announcing itself as an enemy, there is a negative